Okay, so we're going to get started on making some, I don't know, so say branding memes or PR memes, that type of thing. I thought it'd be fun to look up the Facebook cover art size. So I've made an image in that size. If you're wondering where to control the image, make some adjustments, you can go up to image here and you can look under image size. And right there, that gives you the width, height, dimensions. You see I made it 851 by 315 pixels. That's the size when I looked it up, the dimensions for the Facebook cover art at 72 pixels per inch. So if you wanted to make any other adjustments, you could just change your image size that way. Just on a side note, if you do make changes to the pixel size, it will also reflect on the size of the lettering and that type of thing. It will stretch everything bigger. If you wanted to change the canvas size, making the canvas bigger without touching the lettering or the image, the way you do that is you go under image and canvas size. So you can see here, you can push the canvas in certain directions, make it all uniform, or push it off up bottom and add different width and height to the canvas, and then it will just push the canvas around. Or I can just right click on the upper bar here, so that's the short key for it. Is if on a window here I can right click and there's image size and canvas size right in there. So if I want to adjust the spacing of the text, in design lingo, spacing the lettering is referred to as leading, kerning, and tracking. But basically, to adjust the negative space or the space in between the letters in Photoshop, you're just going to go Window, go to Character, and you see that gives you a bunch of spacing options in the character panel right here. So how I do that is when I'm ready to change the spacing of lettering, I just highlight it, go to the text tool, highlight it, and then you can see here this will change, just like it says here, spacing between sentences in your paragraph. And you can also stretch the lettering. I don't recommend that. But here's the actual spacing right here between the letters. So if I go to 75, you can see now that the actual spacing is changed. So this is the one I use. It doesn't really deform the lettering. It just changes the spacing in between them. So once I have a spacing in between the letters that I'm happy with, I'm just going to move on. So if I'm interested in adding a gradient, I'm just going to click down here in the new layer icon. Click that. And there's a layer that's added. I'm just going to go over here to this icon here. There's the gradient, the paint bucket. If I just wanted to fill it in with a solid color, I can go down here, click on the foreground color, pick whatever color it is that I would like to try making the background. So I could just do that. And that has now given me a solid blue color. I could turn the eyeball off, turn the eyeball on to reveal or hide the layer below it. And then I'm just going to shuffle the layer behind this one like shuffling paper. I'm going to make another layer. And once you see this checkerboard pattern, you know the layer is transparent. If I was interested in throwing a gradient on there, I can change that to the gradient tool. Up here, it gives me all sorts of preset gradients if I want. So I'm going to try the black one. Then you just click and drag the gradient, and you can have this. Oh, that's not really what I wanted, but look, it changed it to a circular gradient. To change from the radial gradient here to the linear gradient, I'm just going to click linear gradient, and then I'm just going to take my cursor, click and re-drag that, and that should be a linear gradient, and I can just keep going to whatever linear side I want. There's a bunch of other options here I could play around with, but I'm happy with that. This layer here is on the normal blending mode. I could adjust the opacity of my gradient and have the blue kind of show up, which looks interesting, like that. I could also go here and change the blending mode. I could change to multiply. And what multiply does is multiply gets rid of any whites and keeps blacks. That's how the thinking of this blending mode works. So I'm under multiply, get rid of whites, add black. The other section here works the opposite. Lighten will get rid of the blacks and keep the white for your blending mode. And soft light's kind of a combo of both of those. I think that looks pretty interesting, so I'm going to keep that. So you can go down here if you're interested in adding a shape into your sort of meme or whatever, or brand me or an image. I'm just going to go up here, and down here, if I click on this, you can see I can add different shapes, and here's a custom shape tool that I can play around with. Up here are some prefab shapes that Photoshop has given me. I can click this icon and I can get access to other shapes. There's a pen that, sure. Now I have appended ornaments, and you can see there's lots of shapes for me to play around with. So I'm just going to click this pattern here. If I click and drag that shape, you can see that it's now, the paths are creating that shape, and there the shape has landed on top there. Okay, so back in action here. If I clicked off of the shape by accident, I don't have access to change the color or whatnot. So if I wanted to change the color, make sure you're selected the shape, and then you'll see you have access to a fill color. I could change that color, and you can see as I click away up here, it changes the color. You can also select a gradient here, and then it gives me access to the gradients panel, similar to Illustrator, where you can go and adjust this gradient, double click on the gradient, change the color of that gradient to match the background. I'm trying to come up with a blue color here. Okay. If you click somewhere in here, you can add a point to the gradient. You could double click this and then add another color there, and you're good to go. Again, watch me as I slide these things around and adjust the gradient. If there's one I'm not happy with, I could just click. I'm holding and clicking the mouse, holding it down. I haven't let go of the mouse, and I just drag it, and that's how I can delete that. Not sure exactly what happened, but we'll use this as an opportunity to show you some stuff. I move that over here. I don't want that, but maybe I do want it. But if I don't want it, there's the trash can. I'm going to trash that. Yes, get rid of that. I want the shape layer behind the text layer, so I'm going to click, drag, and shuffle my paper. There you go. The gradient's behind there. I really enjoy using blending modes with things, so I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say try a screen blending mode. That didn't change it a whole lot. A lot of these blending modes are trial and error. That one looks pretty cool, the overlay. Let me check out soft light. Actually, I like that subtlety a little bit better. That's just me. Maybe you would like overlay. You have opacity here, and you can tweak your image further with a little opacity adjustment. Now I'm going to show you something that's I don't know, I call this a crowd favorite of making cool looking text. I'm going to duplicate this text. I'm going to make a copy of this text layer. I'm a fan of dragging this down into the new layer icon and then creating copies that way. I'm going to turn this one off. I'm going to try applying a filter to this. I'm going to go down to the blur filter. I'm going to try applying, let's say, the motion blur. And you can see that this error message comes up. It says blah 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 blah. I can't do anything because it's not rasterized. And if you remember from my lesson on rasterizing and pixels, rasterizing is organizing the pixels in horizontal bands. That when somebody calls something rastered or a rasterized image, they're referring to the pixels. So it's same as calling it hasn't been pixelated. I'm just going to rasterize it. It went from a T or a text layer to an image layer. And then I can play around here with the motion blur. What I like to do is take that motion blur, try a blending mode. Overlay, on the other hand, there it goes, it comes up, and I like how that's integrating with the background. But because I made a copy of it, I still have the original text there in black that I can play around with. I'll lower the opacity of the original text so that it starts playing around with the background. I can go down here inside of the layers palette. These are called layer styles, but it's an FX symbol, so I always think of it as an effect. Right here, I'm going to apply a stroke to show you something here. Drag that down. 5 is still massive. I'm going to change that to 2. Okay. And it's a gray stroke. I don't like it. I think things look good when you use color harmony and stick to a color scheme. Right now, I was just going with it, and it looks like I'm sticking to a monochromatic blue color scheme, so I think the stroke would look good inside of some bluish color. There we go. I put a little stroke on there. This text stands out. The 65% opacity is allowing the text to blend through to the back. I got a motion blur on the layer behind it. It's looking pretty good. Now, let's say I'm going to crank up this opacity to 100% here. So the difference between opacity and fill, okay, these are good things to differentiate. Fill, because I've got a stroke around it, fill is only going to impact what's inside of the letters. It's only going to lower the opacity of the black. It won't touch the stroke. So if I wanted the stroke at 100% opacity, but the black lowered, I would go to fill and watch what happens. I'm knocking my black out. If I took that fill and put it at 0, there's no more black. There's only 100% stroke on there. Whereas if I go to the opacity impacts the entire opacity of the whole layer. So now the stroke is lighter. So bam, I'm going to put the opacity at 100% for now. I like the 65% when the black was at 65%. So I'm going to put the fill at 65%. So the black, I might even go down to 55 just to really highlight things here. There you go. So the black's still there, but you can see the background coming through. The stroke is at 100%, so I'm going to knock the opacity down of everything to say 80. And now that stroke's at 80%, the fill's at 55%, and things are looking kind of interesting, but maybe I'm going to bring that fill back up to 65% since the opacity's down.